Now, let's turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir. Oren, Amir, when we get a chance, this will always be the first topic of discussion. Once we, of course, have something new to report upon. A new video surfaced of a hostage in Hamas captivity, actually in Palestinian Islamic Jihad captivity, which is a Iranian proxy. What can you tell us about it?
So obviously his family authorized the release of this video on Israeli television. Sasha Trapanov, I hope I am pronouncing it correctly, who was at least on video in good shape. But this does not get the hostage release deal any closer. And you know, it seems as if we are all living in two tenses simultaneously, the present and the future. We are still living the last final weeks of the Biden administration. And at the same time, we keep hearing about the new positions being filled in the incoming Trump administration, and also in the ripple effect, in the repercussions, for instance, with Iran announcing that it will reconsider its retaliation for the Israeli retaliation, for the Iranian retaliation, and so on and so forth. Now that President Trump is about to take office and it wants to reassess the Iranian policy vis-a-vis the United States. Now, whether this is the context or only the pretext remains to be seen. But at least this particular concern may be on the back burner for now. The real problem that the Israeli air and missile defense units are facing comes from the drones. Yesterday, another of them killed two civilians in a northern Israeli city. And while the Israeli Air Force has successfully intercepted four of those in a so-called swarm this morning, the Air Force did not elaborate whether fighter planes shot them down or the surface-to-air defense array. But nevertheless, too many of those have managed to penetrate. And while obviously the Air Force and the defense industry are very busy trying to find a solution, it has yet to be found.
Just a couple of points. First one, I will touch on the, you spoke about the drone that struck in Nahariya that killed, unfortunately, two Israeli civilians. One of the drones, according to a report given by Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog during his meeting with his American counterpart Joe Biden, the outgoing president in the United States, there was one of those drones struck actually a kindergarten where moments before that, the kindergarten teacher took all the toddlers, those are toddlers with Down syndrome, many of them, and on the spectrum. They were thankfully in time to get into a protective area and therefore no casualties occurred. Nevertheless, this was very close and this could have been very devastating. With regard to the messaging coming out of the Iranian government, we need to remember that any message coming out of the Iranian government means little to nothing, particularly when the ones calling the shot are the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, who are still, at least vocally, poised time and again to highlight their intention of striking at Israel, and of course the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And of course it's quite interesting to hear the government officials speaking about reconsidering an attack against Israel at a time when all of its proxies are striking Israel every day, with the Iraqis very active, with the Lebanese Hezbollah, of course, as we mentioned, as well as the Houthis from Yemen, launching on a regular basis, and its proxies in the Gaza Strip are holding Israeli citizens in captivity, American citizens in captivity, Russians, including the dual Israeli-Russian national that you referred to earlier, and others as well. And therefore, the sinister remarks by the Iranian government mean nothing. And of course, their actions will be taken into account every step of the way. But let's now turn to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Relik Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you, the Pentagon announced, on the one hand, various aerial strikes against Iranian-backed militant groups in Syria, as well as against the Iranian proxy in Yemen, the Houthis namely, while at the same time we see also a very significant air campaign, deepening aerial sorties in various locations across Lebanon, including in Beirut's Dahya neighborhood, which is, of course, Hezbollah's stronghold.
And including in Syria proper, and lately also against targets that are close to Russian enclaves, so to speak, in Russia itself. In Syria itself. I think this is a show of force that tells the proxies that not only Israel is going to step up its attacks against Hezbollah in order to put the pressure on them to come into some sort of an agreement in Lebanon that will allow the Israeli citizens to return, and also to some extent the Lebanese who left the southern part of Lebanon to return, but also adding a U.S. resolution to attack some of those proxies, in this case in Syria, and the Houthis as well. So there is a indication that both Israel and the United States are stepping up the attacks in order to reach some kind of a resolution in the north. And I would add, the more the merrier.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Oren, the Houthis came out with a very interesting announcement yesterday, during the course of which they highlighted that they launched an attack against the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group, including 2 accompanying vessels of the aircraft carrier itself, claiming success. Nevertheless, subsequently, we did hear Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, or Major General Pat Ryder, coming out and saying that indeed those attacks occurred, but they failed. What's going on in this context? Are we expected to see an uptick of attempts by this Iranian proxy to target the United States over and over again until success is actually achieved?
Well, it's mostly a public relations stunt, and the Houthis are well aware that the leadership of CENTCOM, of Central Command, especially General Eric Michael Kurilla and his Vice Commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, that they are very militant. They always recommend to the civilian authorities in the Pentagon, Secretary Austin, and all the way up the chain to President Biden, to take a more proactive stance against those Yemenite militants, extremists. And up to now, at least, most of these recommendations were not accepted. It doesn't mean that in the waning days of this administration, we won't see a parting salvo against them. But for the time being, they can afford, or at least they believe they can afford, to take potshots at the U.S. Navy, even though they know that the vessels are well protected and that the missiles launched from the shore will fall short of their targets. But nevertheless, they come out with the announcements because the announcements are more important than the actual hits.
Can we define pot shots? The munitions that were utilized there, we're talking here about roughly 25 munitions, including very advanced surface-to-sea anti-ship missiles, probably delivered by the Iranians, possibly even by the Russians. These are not necessarily pot shots. And if we really look at the different commanders of the aircraft carriers that were here, either previous ones or the current one, we hear them say time and again that they have faced unmanned aerial vehicles on a regular basis trying to strike at the aircraft carriers here deployed in the CENTCOM AOR, while at the same time, I must say that I wouldn't necessarily call Vice Admiral Cooper and General Kurilla as militant. They are military generals who are supposed to provide options of offensive caliber, but they seem to be quite clear-eyed with regard to the cultural construct of this region.
Yes, but the irony in what you described is that much like Hamas 3 years ago, when they launched missiles at Jerusalem, they also did it once or twice more recently. They do it knowing full well that the Israeli Iron Dome system and others will intercept those missiles. Because imagine, if there was no Iron Dome, Hamas missiles will fall on one of their holy sites in Jerusalem. And by the same token, the Houthis count on the US Navy to foil their plots, because otherwise, assuming that the US aircraft carrier or a destroyer were to be hit, obviously there will be such savage retaliation that the Houthis will not be able to bear it. So they do it in order for the other side, the US, to fend off these attacks.
Again, 25 projectiles of sophisticated nature. I have to disagree. Maybe General Shafir can give us a better clarity on this. To what degree are the Houthis poised on actually targeting their intended targets? Or are we seeing here really a game of messaging and an attempt, or a successful attempt at that, to block freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb, the Gulf of Aden, and other waterways in the adjacent to Yemen?
Well, why don't we start at the end game? What are they looking for? They're looking for disrupting navigation, marine navigation through the straits, and meanwhile, stopping the traffic going through the Suez Canal. And they're quite successful, not only in that, but also the prices of insurance have gone up to such a level that all those ships, or the marine navigation goes around the Cape, like in the old times before the Suez Canal. We're talking about the 19th century, rather than go through the canal. So as far as that is concerned, and their ability to sustain that manner by shooting every now and then and voicing their threats, they're actually doing what they were expected by the Iranians, and are fully successful. And the fact that they take hits every now and then is something quite immaterial, because it doesn't change the equation. So except for the, I would say, technical or tactical ability of the U.S. naval ships to fend off those attacks, they're doing their thing, much like the drones in the north of Israel. Since the Hezbollah are interested in terrorizing the Israelis, they're quite successful, although they're taking hits that can't be sustained over a very long time. So we're seeing simple, I would say, munitions doing a job that larger munitions can't heck, so to speak. And this is what asymmetric war is all about. And we need to, in some cases, bite the bullet, just like those 10-pound munition drones are able to run Israelis into shelters with causing very little damage. Remember, we were expecting 5,000 rockets per day, and we're down to something between 50 and 100 that are affecting the north of Israel. But are they a strategic weapon? Yes, it is a strategic weapon, much more than the larger ones being shot down by our counter missiles. So this is asymmetric war, and the answer would be either on the diplomatic front or putting a lot more pressure on the shooters in other ways.
Indeed. Well, 2 points on this. I think it's important to highlight, as Vice Admiral Bradley Cooper said prior to assuming the role of Deputy Commander of CENTCOM when he was still the Commander of the 5th Fleet and NAVCENT, namely the maritime component of Central Command. He highlighted that there is not a single incident in which the Houthis are not operating with an RGC Quds Force operator just next to them telling them what to do. So unless the Iranians are the ones bearing the brunt for those activities, this will not cease and desist as intended. With regard to the previous Trump administration, when they had a similar problem in the northern sector, district of Khorasan in northern Afghanistan, against Daesh Wilayat Khorasan, namely the Islamic State Khorasan region, they ultimately decided to launch or to drop a MOAB, a very significant bomb, conventional weapon, which trickled down in all the halls of power throughout the region, including in Afghanistan and even China and elsewhere, which ultimately brought about an end to the various activities that were conducted by this terrorist group. Maybe they could learn something from this for the Houthis in Yemen, something that I hear is indeed on the table for the next administration. But Mr. Oren, when we're looking now to the Syrian front, one of the key aspects, the key challenges that we're speaking about is ongoing efforts by the Iranians to transfer munitions, to resupply Hezbollah, something that, as General Shafir also mentioned, is being tackled by Israel time and again.
Yes, just regarding your last point, there is no silver bullet or silver bomb, any particular item in the munitions list which will solve all problems or put the fear of Allah into these other enemies. But be it as it may, the Iranians have gone into a lot of effort to revitalize Hezbollah after the entire chain of command has been decimated from Hassan Nasrallah on down, including his successor Sefi Adin and his own successor Naim Qassem running away from Lebanon. And there are now probably Iranian officers in the Hezbollah chain of command filling in for these Hezbollah leaders who were eliminated. And another part of their effort is, as you said, trying to transfer munitions, equipment, either through the Syrian border passages, which Israel hits when it finds out that such a shipment is on its way, or perhaps through the sea, maybe through the air. All of these attempts are interdicted by Israel when the Israeli intelligence finds out about them. And the question will be, once there is an agreement on ceasefire, how to enforce these Iranian efforts to rebuild Hezbollah, and is that a possible way to reignite the war? Because if it is not accepted by all sides that they cannot do it, then it will surely trigger a new round.
General Shafir, we're seeing quite a significant uptick in the last 2 months at least of Iraqi unmanned aerial vehicles being launched from Iraq towards Israeli territory, going from roughly 2 to 5 a week at the start of the war now to roughly 40 a month to date, and we're still not the whole way there. What can be done in order to deal with a situation in a time when it seems at least that the U.S. Central Command is asking Israel to not necessarily react in force in order to avoid a conflagration with Iraq proper and putting at risk U.S. service members who are operating in Iraq?
I think there is no real solution in this case, other than to strike them in Iraq itself. Of course, it's easier to intercept them because of the length of time it takes from their launch until they reach the vicinity of Israel, allowing the Air Force to have multiple tries at shooting them down, rather than the close proximity in Lebanon and the terrain. It's also a tactical question of the terrain coming from the east or the north. The east is a flat area, which makes it easier to find through the radar and then intercept. But I would add that all these proxy shots lead to one target, which is Iran. And as we know, the Iranians were warned by a third side that the game will be over soon. So they have about 2 months to play in this game until, I would say, the United States is more, how shall we say it, responsive to Israel's will to hit Iranian targets other than military. So it's a game that has to do also with the agreements between Israel and the new administration coming in on the tactics and strategy, all of which show or goes to put pressure on Iran, which has been putting messages out. And I think what we're seeing in those messages is a bit of a change of mind in the Iranian leadership as to how to welcome, so to speak, the Trump administration. Are they going to be belligerent, thinking that Israel will be allowed to hit painful targets on the ground? Or are they going to keep the game the way it is now? I think we're close to the end rather than the beginning as this is concerned.
Jonathan, I must protest your decision to direct this question to General Shafir. He has an unfair advantage over both of us because he is the only one who flew to the outskirts of Baghdad and struck a certain target in 1981.
Indeed. Well, Operation Opera was an interesting encounter, I'm sure. You were about to say something, General Shafir.
Yeah, so I think the Iranians will have to decide what their next move is going to be, because obviously they recognize that the proxies have not really delivered the blow that they were supposed to. Their own missiles did not prove to be as effective as they thought they would be. And I think come January, they have to make a decision what they're doing. And I'll just mention as well that Israel struck a Syrian post very close to a Russian enclave. And there is an agreement that the Russians will not shoot. They're manning their own ground-to-air missiles, the S-400, in Syria itself, and they did not take a single shot. And I guess the whole deal is going to change because the Russian-Iranian war is a lot more important for the Russians than the Iranians themselves. They are a sidekick. So, and this is probably going to, there's going to be a change on the Ukraine war pretty soon. And as we all know, there are some talks going on between the United States, Russia, and the Ukrainians who are pretty worried about what's going to take place. So we're in for a strategic change on a larger scale that will affect what is happening here. So I would make an educated guess that things are going to get wrapped up within 2 or 3 months, one way or another, and I think it's going to be not one way, but the other.
I actually think that it's not going to be the other, but rather the one way, or the highway, pretty much. But yeah, when we're talking about alignment of policy and looking at things in a somewhat more clear-eyed fashion or realpolitik fashion, the Trump administration nor Israel will be beating around the bush. They will deal with the issue at its source. But with that, we have run out of time, so I'd like to immediately thank General Shafir and Mr. Oren for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.